Hello, I'm Robert Johnson, and welcome to People in Perspective. Joining me today is Joshua Blomgren, the Chief Medical Officer of Chicago Fire Football Club. So Joshua, what made you become a doctor?
It was a decision that I made when I was 12. So I had cycled through a bunch of different things growing up, and at age 12 decided I wanted to be a doctor and never changed my mind. Pursued that through college and then on to medical school. And it wasn't until later on that I got interested in the field of sports medicine.
And was there any specific moment that became you interested in sports medicine?
I grew up an athlete and then I played college soccer, so it's always been an interest of mine. And then once I learned that I could kind of meld my love of medicine and my love of sports and caring for athletes, it was a natural fit.
Was there a certain sport that blossomed into it, or was it just all of them overall?
Pretty much all of them overall. I grew up in a small town, so I played every sport throughout high school. I was a 4-sport athlete at a small high school in Iowa, and went on to play college soccer, so soccer's always kind of been the main love, but I think being involved in all of the other sports helped me understand how athletes move, how they get injured, and so I think it actually helped me in the end as opposed to focusing on one sport.
Well, seeing as you were a sports player and now you're being a doctor for it, is there a certain sport that you love over the rest, or is it just an equal balance?
My heart still lives with soccer. I think that's what led me to be involved with Chicago Fire Football Club. But I've been involved with the Chicago Marathon over my career, and so I have kind of a fondness of runners, and wouldn't say that I gravitate towards one sport or one type of athlete, but just really have a love of caring for athletic individuals.
So while you've been going through a lot of multiple sports, is there any of them that you think is safer than the rest, or is it all dangerous?
There's certainly ones that are safer. Things like golf, there's not oft injured, but any sport can create a circumstance or a situation that can lead to an injury, but there's certainly some that are more dangerous than others. The combat sports like boxing, MMA, those sorts of things kind of lend themselves to injuries and trauma.
I mean, that is true, but between the middle, there's the team sports, including soccer and football. Of those, have you noticed any more danger there, or are they all more or less sometimes and sometimes not? Because multiple times I've seen online and on news that it's been a very big problem with concussions or people breaking parts.
Yeah, well, so the sports often get categorized, and contact and collision sports are one of the categories. Football falls into contact and collision, and actually soccer does too, which you don't really think of soccer being a contact or collision sport, or at least it's not happening as often as football. But just the nature of football, sports like rugby, those lend themselves to the collision or contact type injuries as well as concussions. But we can see collision type injuries happen in any sport.
Well, again, on the part where you're on multiple teams and helping multiple sports, were any of them more easier to reach from? Because as they're all in stadiums, it's kind of big and kind of wide. Has any of them been struggling to get from the area of where you can help them to the actual field?
Absolutely. Actually, one moment stands out in my mind from this past Chicago Fire season. We had an athlete that was injured at one end of the field. We ran out, tended to him, and then in the process of returning him back to the game in the opposite corner of the field, one of our athletes went down injured because the game had continued on, and then it meant running from one corner of the field to the other. And I don't do that on a normal basis in my day-to-day, unlike the soccer players.
Well, that sounds much like a huge problem. Well, on the part of movement, is the field of play ever changed the way you had to move, or is it just the field's open across?
I mean, not in terms of the way that I have to move. We have, as we consider care of the athlete during the course of a game, and this is regardless of the venue, but specific to soccer, there's certain obstacles that can become either a hindrance to movement or can contribute to injury. If you've ever seen a game on TV, there's video boards around the stadium. There's different things that promote the organizations that support the club, and those are sometimes close to the field. Sometimes there's mounting devices for cameras that can become an obstruction, or if someone slides off the field, they can become injured hitting one of these boards. And so those are always things that we have to take into consideration. And one of the things that is part of my job is overseeing and planning for those sorts of things. And so we always have an emergency action plan in place, and then we practice it so that in those moments, if it's a game situation and a player has a catastrophic injury or they have a catastrophic heart-related event, we have practiced and planned so that we all know what we're doing, so that in that emergency moment, there's no doubt.
So it seems that you guys plan a lot. Are there any common injuries that you plan mostly about that you had to look forward?
Yeah, in soccer, the more specific injuries are ankle injuries, ankle sprains, knee injuries, ligament injuries to the knee. We also see a lot of muscle and soft tissue injuries, particularly the hamstrings are common, and then head injuries and concussion are quite common in soccer as well.
Is there any specific way you have to treat them, or are they all mixed together into one certain route?
Yeah, every athlete's individualized, so each injury has different levels of severity. Some are so severe that they require surgery. Obviously, that takes a lot longer to get an athlete back. Other times, they're more minor injuries, and so we can tailor the treatment to not only the specific injury, but the specific athlete. We also take into consideration the position that they play on the field. This is regardless of sport. And so we look at not only the style of play, but how they move on the field, because that dictates how we help them to recover from the injury, but then also rehabilitate. So we have to make the transition from healing the injury and then get them back into sport-specific type movement, and then progress them back into the specific training for their sport before we can just release them to play. And so our job as a medical staff for any of these teams is to make sure that they return as safely and healthily as possible.
I see. Well, Joshua, it was great having you on the show. I'll see you again. I'm Robert Johnson, and this is People in Perspective.